Our next session is, I hope, moving us from the historical and contextual conversation that Dick Deasy so eloquently provided for us into today and where we are and where we could be. And I'm just really, really pleased about the panel that's going to work with us today. Garth Harries is Assistant Superintendent of the New Haven Public Schools and has really become known and rightfully as a leader in the whole conversation about school reform, not only here in New Haven but nationally in his work in New York. And I'm just so pleased that he's here today, able to work with us. So let's say hello to him first. And my friend of probably, 30 years or so, who now we're able to share an additional thing, which is that we are both proud grandfathers, Scott, this year. And so, to me, that is the single most important attribute that Scott Shuler brings to the table now, is that you now have an added dimension because you're a grandfather as well. But Scott Shuler, in addition to the many things you've read about in the booklet and that many of you in music education know the unbelievable work that Scott has done, we in Connecticut are proud to know that he's our State Department of Education arts education consultant. And I'm just so pleased to have both Garth and Scott here today, and I'm really looking forward to this next session. Thank you.
Doesn't it feel good to be respected? To be here, to have somebody paying attention to your needs and thinking about you for a little while. This is what I'm struck as I watch education reform when it goes the wrong way, when it goes in the direction that sometimes troubles us, that it doesn't sufficiently respect teachers. For me, one of the incredibly moving things about that horrible situation in Newtown was the way that the educators stepped up. And then again in Oklahoma, where educators actually literally put their bodies over the children to help protect them from the tornadoes that were coming through. And the thing, although that's moving and inspiring, it was not surprising because of working with teachers for our entire lives. I mean, you literally give your life for your children. And in this room, you music educators, there is no one who gives more of their lives to children than you do. So you deserve to be respected. And thank you, the Yale Class of 57, Yale University, and New Haven for making this possible. This is really an exceptional experience. Now, I have a fairly short period of time. I have taken literally hundreds of slides, dozens of documents, and tried to distill them in a fashion where I can give you a little bit of surface information. You can dig more deeply by looking at the handouts, and I'll make some reference to the handouts that are in your packet as I go through. And then in the handouts, you have reference to additional materials, most of which are accessible online or as an NAFME member. So I'm going to get you started today. Do a rough overview, put your seats in the upright position and fasten your safety belts because we're going to fly. So here's the topic. We're talking about education reform. Education reform, I put in quotation marks because it goes well and it goes awry and we don't know which is which sometimes. So we'll go from there. There are three parts. I'm going to give you a very nickel summary of the music education and the vision underlying it, make some reference as I go along to the new national standards that are under development. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call education deform, which is what happens frequently when change goes wrong. By the way, education reform, Dick asked about where that came from. They actually did focus groups. And they discovered that education reform got the best focus group response. So that's why that term has become term of art. And then talk a little bit about your context in this context of education reform. So without further ado, let's take vision. Now I'm going to jump you through these principles. They're all in a column that I wrote for the Music Educators Journal that everyone who's an NAFME member can access online. I didn't copy this particular article for you. But the first principle is actually about all the arts. that children need all the arts because they need to find one art form, at least one art form that resonates with them, that they can carry forward into life as their connection to aesthetics and culture and beauty. Second, that in order to really be artistically literate, to be active for the rest of your life, one needs to achieve some independence. That independence can be defined as mastering the three artistic processes to which Dick Deasy referred and which are the basis for our new national standards, as well as NAEP. Fourth, that in order to achieve independence, students have to start their study early and end it late. They have to begin in the very early years of life, preferably at home, continue it through school in a systematic way, and continue into high school. In fact, the research by the National Endowment for the Arts shows that the single best predictor of involvement in the arts as an adult is high school study of the arts. Finally, in order to ensure that students come into high school programs, although we do have a high school graduation requirement that will become effective with the graduating class of 2020 in Connecticut, and many other states have a similar requirement, we need to attract students into the program for more than just that 1 year that's required. So we need to provide an array of electives that reach out to them to bring them into the classes, and we need the cooperation of our school environment in steering kids toward those classes instead of pushing them out and into other venues. The three artistic processes to which Dick already referred today are that of creating new art, of performing existing work with interpretation that gives them life, and responding to art as an audience member or a consumer. And I'll come back to this theme later. But you see here before you a matrix presenting the artistic processes as they exist and will exist in the new music standards, and pretty much as they existed for the NAEP assessments that we did in '97 and repeated just a few years ago. These processes are really not just, as many in the public think about it, products. When people think about what you do in arts class, it's concert, 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 or exhibit, exhibit, exhibit. It's that iceberg that lies beneath the surface of learning that leads to quality concerts and quality art exhibits and artistically literate children. So it's these processes that lie at the foundation. You actually have a copy of an article in your packet, one of the columns from my MEJ, which talks about the artistic process model in more detail. I'm going to give you only a light treatment today. This is the principle underlying the new national standards. These artistic processes are built around the processes. The new standards are built around processes in each art form, in fact, and that is the Wikispaces site where you can get continuing updates about the project, and in fact you can also join the Facebook page and get updates that way. Now, what is our purpose? The nickel summary that I'd give for the purpose of music education is to help children find paths they're willing to walk into their adult lives in music. That we want to put them on a path, help them find a path that engages them musically so they keep it up, so they keep going. The principles underlying the standards echo that. The idea is that if you consider each of these colors a different art form, that everyone find that art form that inspires them, that reaches them, and that they can choose to pursue that art form on into adult life, if not as a maker of art, at least as an audience member. And from that one art form, we tend to expand. How many of you, I know most of you were primarily trained in music, how many of you have moved on from music to take an interest in theater or go to art museums, etc.? You look around the room, that's the common path. But you need that one entry point, that point of passion. So let's talk about education and this whole issue of education deform. We know that the arts are core. They've been defined as such in every document. Dick described the fact that they were also defined that way in Goals 2000. What does that mean? What should that mean for children? It should mean that it's non-negotiable, that every child has a right to an arts education as part of core curriculum. If there is nothing else that schools assure to their children, it should be access to quality instruction in all of the areas deemed core. After all, isn't that what core means? So I was thrilled to be present at the release of the Fast Response Survey, the National Survey of Arts Programs, to hear Secretary Duncan talk about this. What I wasn't thrilled about was his comment, which echoes what I've observed as I've traveled around the country as the president of NAFME, that urban children in particular and children of poverty are increasingly being deprived of arts education. that over the last decade of so-called school reform under No Child Left Behind, we've seen a decrease in children's access to arts education. What I was thrilled about was for him to describe it in the same way that I've been describing it for years. It's not only an equity issue, it's a civil rights issue. There is no way that it's right for children of any subgroup to be deprived of that education. This is the kind of school that too many of our children attend right now. Schools, it happens, those of you who are not from Connecticut, that CMT is the name of our state tests. Children in gray, lifeless classrooms being hammered with test preparation so that they can make adequate yearly progress. And the children who look out the window, who see the bigger picture, who crave something else in their lives and their curriculum, are being treated as those being left behind, whereas in fact, probably they have some insights that the others are missing entirely. This is a pie chart that I often use when I talk to school administrators about the elementary school day. Now, you've never seen this pie chart before, and every one of us can name the biggest pie slice and go right through them in order. What's the biggest pie slice here?
Literacy.
Yeah. What's the second biggest slice?
Math.
What's the next one? What's the next one? Now it's getting quieter, isn't it? And now then it's a little up for grabs, isn't it? Maybe world language, maybe arts. They get very tiny slices. When you have conversations with administrators who want to take 15 minutes of time out of art instruction and give it to language arts, I pull out this pie chart and say, are you kidding me? You've got half the school day to teach the kids a language they've been speaking, most of them since birth, and you're going to take a half of our instructional time to try to improve that? I mean, I've got 45 to 90 minutes a week to get kids ready, and by November I have them up on stage in front of the entire community, and you're complaining that you don't have enough time with half the school day? Learn to teach. Students need instructional time in the arts. They need time to achieve their goals, and they need more than one repetition a week, because that's the way people learn. If you could teach literacy in any communication form in one episode a week, that's the way we'd be teaching English language arts. But we don't, for a good reason. So we need repetition and substance in our instruction. High school graduation requirement I referred to earlier is very important. If you think about it, in those kind of substandard programs that are unfortunately common in a lot of districts around the country where kids get once a week for 40 minutes, 1 year of high school study is more time than they get in their entire K-6 experience. So that high school graduation requirement is doubly important. Now, let's talk a little bit about the waivers. Essentially, No Child Left Behind was a train wreck waiting to happen. The way that the law was written in 2014, everybody had to be perfect. No subgroups would fail, and everybody knew that everybody was going to fail, except in some very small school districts where the subgroups were very tiny. So Secretary Duncan has announced, because they were frustrated in trying to get a new bill through Congress, that they would now offer waivers under certain conditions. And there were 4 conditions. One is that you had to adopt college and career-ready standards. A lot of the controversy there is that that's been essentially defined as being the Common Core standards, Common Core state standards. Second is that you had to develop differentiated recognition, accountability, and support for, and then the third was this effective instruction and leadership, which is where this whole teacher evaluation thing comes in. And then finally, this is the joke of all time, reducing duplication and unnecessary burden. I put a little laugh track under that because that's like not happening at all. Anybody feel that your burden's been lightened recently? Raise your hand. All right, so here's really the scenario. You've got No Child Left Behind coming to get you. You're hanging on the cliff and you're trying to decide, those waters look safer or not? I'm going to make a waiver application. Turns out when you get down there are sharks. It's not easy. So let's talk about we're going to talk a little bit about how we maneuver through the sharks here. So here are some of the headlines that have appeared in various publications about the end result of all this activity. And you can see that from the wording of the headlines, everybody's struggling with this. Each of you in your own state sees some manifestation of this problem. Now, everybody, how many of you have seen something that looks like this in your state? the donut, if you're a healthy type, maybe the whole wheat bagel, with half of it, roughly, this is the educator evaluation plan, roughly half is around the classroom observation, and roughly half is about student achievement. And depending on what state you're in, sometimes that student achievement includes test scores in subjects you don't teach, with students you don't teach. And in other states, they're a little more respectful of you than that. In Connecticut, I think we're doing a little better than that right now. And part of it, so I want to just touch on the teacher evaluation classroom observation piece. There is this fallacy being promulgated, and I really like Charlotte Danielson. She's very bright and has done wonderful work. But she's promoting this fantasy that good teaching is good teaching. And the truth is, to quote Barat, not. It's not true. In fact, good teaching looks dramatically different in different content areas. There are common qualities to good teaching which show up in these generic rubrics, but good teaching is different. So for that reason, in the position statement published by your national association, NAFME, we call for at least some supervision to be taking place by someone who actually understands the content area being supervised. Radical notion, and just for show of hands, how many of you are, let's ask our out-of-state folks, how many of you see regularly, have in your classroom giving you feedback, someone who understands music and what you do? All right, now that's actually a little better than average in the percentage. So this is an issue. The second category, NAFME is developing a workbook that will be distributed sometime in the fall nationally, helping guide music teachers through this quagmire of teacher evaluation, where they often, the research shows, are given poorer evaluations even if they perform well because of lack of understanding about what they do. I've given you now on the student assessment side, I've put in your packet some handouts that refer you to other sources where you can find examples of well-designed assessments. It happens that in Connecticut we've done some of those that are being used nationally, also state of Washington, and Colorado's done a review of the best of, and they have links to most of the best of in music education on their website, so refer you to those. In our new national standards, this is the matrix to which Dick referred in his morning presentation, Dick Deasy. There are cornerstone assessments that are going to be made available, they're going to be developed for key grade levels, 2, 5, 8, and 3 levels of high school. One of the ways that you could be involved in the development of national standards is to volunteer to be a piloter of those cornerstones. There'll be more information about that forthcoming through NAFME and hopefully through your State Department of Education as well. Now, there are other policy issues that have grown out of education reform strategies or policies, and I've put a packet, it looks like a spreadsheet, 3 pages or long in your packet I was invited by the U.S. Department of Education to come in and talk with a group of their employees about the impact of U.S. Department of Ed policy on arts education nationally, and I listed a number of their policies, talked about what the issues were with those policies and made suggestions. So there's more detail in your packet than you're going to see on the screen, but I want to just touch on 3. One is a question, actually, a gentleman earlier today made some reference to this idea of what we call SRBI in Connecticut, but it's RTI in other states, response to intervention or universal design. The impact of that has been that in many classrooms, students are pulled out of arts classrooms for remediation in reading and math. How many of you see that going on? I get tingles as I see those hands go up at the tragedy for these children. That someone would pull them out of a class, a core class, to remediate them in another class. Now, we have guidelines in the state of Connecticut, which are widely disregarded, I will add, that say that remediation should take place in addition to, not instead of, instruction in core areas. The state of Texas, or the Republic of Texas, depending on your opinion, their legislature just passed a law which Governor Perry has not yet signed, which would mandate that no more than 10% of the class time can be missed for remediation purposes and other subjects. That's a model that I would recommend that you take back to your states for implementation. We have not put sufficient oversight of balanced curriculum on schools that have emerged like magnets and charter schools. Just because my parents send me to a science magnet school doesn't mean that I miss out on arts education. Science is a vehicle for teaching the full curriculum, not a substitute for a full curriculum. In the same way that I wouldn't want any child at an arts magnet to miss out on studying science. It's just not right for children, and we haven't had sufficient oversight. Data show that charter schools nationally are far less likely to offer a balanced curriculum than other kinds of schools, and arts are among the subjects that tend to be undertaught in those schools. There are good examples of balanced charter schools, but not generally speaking. STEM versus STEAM, Dick alluded to, I'm not going to dwell here. And then this access to funding to which you referred. Most of you would find, if you checked your district budgets, that $0 from Title I are being spent on arts education. That's wrong, that shouldn't be happening. It's not against the law to do it that way, it's just not right for kids. So here, what I've done, Dick alluded to the fact that there's new legislation coming up. Between 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, when Senator Harkin proposed his version, which would be the Senate Democrats' version of ESCA reauthorization, and yesterday afternoon when 2 House Republicans issued bills, after years of nothing, suddenly in a span of 2.5 days, we have 3 competing bills. Senator Lamar Alexander also presented a Senate Republican bill that will all be competing for attention, and we'll hope that Congress can actually work together and come to some solution. But some of the characteristics that are in Harkin's bill include the fact that the arts are core still. Music is specifically mentioned, which has not happened before. We see expanded learning time funding, for which the arts are eligible. We see in the 21st century funding that music and the other arts are available. And we see also in programs of significance, which include a variety of programs, that funding would be made available. We see also, unfortunately, the omission of anything but STEM in the teacher evaluation section. We see Title I reference, and this is actually very important if this is enacted, all of the early childhood focus that's been going on. This federal statute would require that they have goals for creative arts in early childhood standards in every state in order to receive funding. And then the Promised Neighborhoods also include some art component. As you see, I coded things that I thought were good in green and bad in red. So we need to advocate. We need to advocate effectively, and it happens that we do that through the ballot box. And I'm just going to make very quick reference to the fact that NAFME Advocacy Groundswell, if you haven't already signed up for the Groundswell network, Google NAFME and Groundswell and sign that up. They'll keep you apprised of what's going on in terms of advocacy work. Ultimately, we have to speak up for kids by standing up for balanced education, and this is a way to know what's going on and be in a network to respond to influence policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels. Now, school reform. It's a little Steve Jobs.
Ultimately, it comes down to taste. It comes down to trying to expose yourself to the best things that humans have done, and then try to bring those things in to what you're doing. I mean, Picasso had a saying, said, good artists copy, great artists steal. And we have, always been shameless about stealing great ideas. And I think part of what made the Macintosh great was that the people working on it were musicians and poets and artists and zoologists and historians who also happen to be the best computer scientists in the world.
In Nicholas Negroponte's book on being digital, Nicholas Negroponte you might recognize as the MIT genius who is behind the $100 laptops for third world countries. He teaches the Media Lab at MIT, and in that book he mentions that the first day of his digital media lab, he asks how many people in the room are musicians, and every hand in the room goes up consistently. That there is this connection with success. And that's been recognized in a variety of books. Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat, in Sir Kenneth Robinson's Out of Our Minds. He has a great video from his TED Talk up on the YouTube. The Whole New Mind by Daniel Pink, and Richard Florida as well, The Rise of the Creative Class, all reach the same conclusion, that it is that combination of the arts with the technical and other subjects that really makes a person successful. The Harvard Business Review picked up on that and did an entire issue devoted to this as preparation for success. In fact, the creative pyramid that comes out of Tough Times, Tough Choices for the National Center for the Economy point out that the jobs that are likely to stay here, if they stay here, are those that come out of our creative economy, not the ones that are repetitious and prototypical, because they're the ones that are going to go abroad. 21st century skills. Here are the 4 that are typically discussed most often, although the document is larger. If you go to the 21st Century Skills site listed here, you can find an alignment chart between the 1994 art standards and the 21st Century Skills, on which we collaborated with the 21st Century Skills Group. There are many, many ways in which the arts teach those very directly. I also mentioned that in the article that's in your packet. These are the philosophical foundations for our new national standards. You'll notice that in these 5 foundations, communication, creativity are well represented, along with culture and well-being, some other important attributes. That's all outlined in the framework document that he referred you to up on the wiki site. I'm not going to show you this. Unfortunately, we don't have time today. But this is a brilliant conversation, very short excerpt from the author of the Outlander series of science fiction books. I've never read them, but they sound very intriguing. She's a scientist who talks about the relationship between science and the arts and the commonness in finding patterns and asking deep questions. Bloom's taxonomy, the new taxonomy, as you know, has create at the top of the cognitive sequence. And so if we look at the artistic processes and look for higher order verbs, we find even just in performing, we see that there are high order verbs throughout this process of performing a work of music. And in fact, throughout the arts, if you take a look at these black verbs here, they're all higher order verbs that are listed. We know that the arts are a form of communication. In fact, they emerge in every culture precisely because there are things you just can't say with words. Words are limited tools. You can't say Picasso's Guernica. You can't say Beethoven's Ninth. It is something much more profound and meaningful in the form that it's come forward. Now, within the new set of art standards, there is something called creative practices. You'll see mathematical practices in a moment. These creative practices define steps that one takes when one's creating, which are overarching, that permeate the arts and can be carried over into other avenues of our work in schools. Life skills. Here are the life skills that psychologists are now identifying as crucial to success in life, ranked in the order as to how they correlate with success. This first one that you see here, conscientiousness, the ability to work in teams, is second. This is something that permeates the work that you do as music teachers all the time. And it's little wonder that we have that contribution because the standards we set are so much higher in music education. You know, what does it take to get an A on a math test? What percentage? 90%. Have you ever heard of 90% correct music performance? That is the definition of disaster. I have here a modest example.
Correct.
We won't subject you to the rest of that performance. The standards to which kids strive when they're in music class are far beyond the standards that are expected of them in almost any other venue in school. And schools and surveys of high school graduates will tell you that that's true. We also have to remember the point that a gentleman made in the second row, which is that it's not just about making a living, it's about making life worth living, and that's another contribution that we make. Now let's do a quick dash through the Common Core. David Coleman, who's one of the co-authors of Common Core, makes very strong statements about the role of the arts and their importance in kids' lives and has no interest whatsoever in seeing that supplanted by language arts and math in its entirety. There are 2 types of alignment with Common Core that you see in the arts. One is explicit. There are actually mentions of the arts, and I'll show you a couple of examples very quickly here. And then the other are relationships between the nature of the arts and the Common Core's strategies about thinking and their goals in that category. And I'll also give you a couple of examples. So here's the quick overview of ELA and math. There's Common Core standards. Now, if you consider text in the broader 21st century context, 21st century being a multimedia culture, then text, we are text. Music is text, art is text. We are the media through which people increasingly communicate. So if you took that approach, almost all of the language arts standards apply to the arts. Now, you can see explicit mentions within the standards, multimedia components making specific mentions of music as well within these standards if you examine them carefully. Now, if you take a look at the overall framework, here's a reading standard using about artistically literate students use a variety of artistic media, both to express their own ideas and they can also understand the expressions of others. Another common core connection built right in. Close reading and complex literacy and informational text is an area where it's not as obvious on the surface, but you quickly get there. It talks about using songs in instruction as being one powerful way of getting at that text idea in a more traditional way. Tiered vocabulary, tier 1 being the lowest level vocabulary, moving up to tier 2, complex text. Think about our own national anthem and the number of words in that national anthem which are not in common usage among youth, and the discussion about understanding the meaning of that anthem and how important that is. Then if we go on to tier 3, you see that there is content-specific vocabulary, and in fact, in our music classrooms, we should be using this kind of language regularly with our students. Now, mathematics connections are not as immediately obvious, but nevertheless present. Here are the mathematical practices that I mentioned earlier, reminder of the creative practices. Remember, imagine, investigate, construct, reflect. Now, let's look at one of these verbose math standards. Can you believe that's one standard in mathematics? If I were texting, I would say, OMG, right? So, all right, so there's a math standard. Now, remember the 4 constructs we were just looking at very quickly. Imagine, investigate, construct, reflect. Here's the imagine text in that. Here's the investigate text. Here's the construct text. And here's the reflect text, highlighted. That a good 30 to 40% of that math standard relates directly to what we're doing in our creative processes in the arts. Here's that creating process. And by the way, the creating process in the arts is directly related to process writing and also scientific invention. How is this going to be presented? The last couple slides here. Here is a mock-up of a website. You click on one tab, you see the art standards. If you want to see the connections between the art standards and the Common Core English Language Arts Standards, you click on a different tab, and those are highlighted on your screen. If you want to see the connections with 21st century skills, click on that tab, and they're highlighted on that screen, which should be very helpful to us in identifying the connections. And here we have to remember in the arts that if you don't get an arts education, the students are doomed to a much worse consequence. Need I say anything more? So I'll close there and turn it over to Garth for commentary, and then we'll continue with conversation after that.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to try and briefly take up the challenge of engaging you all in the discussion of what is reform, and seeing the role for yourselves and thinking about what reform means. And as I do that, I just want to start quickly. So how many folks in the audience are teachers of music? How many folks in the audience are teachers of literacy? Good. How many folks, and I do think the question of reform, how many folks are teaching in an urban setting? And how many suburban / rural? Okay. So my career started in New York City with Joel Klein, where I was part of senior leadership there. I've been in New Haven since 2009, leading our reform effort here. So I've had a career in education that spans the epicenter of what people think of as the sort of modern generation of reform for the last 10 years. I would say, well, I think we're at a profoundly interesting time in the question of education reform. I think what it means, I actually think it's, I disagree with the point that Scott made. I think it's a terrible term, reform. I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I actually think it's not at all evocative for at least what it means to me, which is the endeavor to organize work differently so that we can improve results for kids, full stop. And there are lots of pieces to that. I want to sort of flag for you sort of 3 initial points, and then I want to run through what I think it means for schools, for teachers, and for students, and why I think the moment we're at in reform right now is particularly interesting. The first is, this is a big part of my career. I would urge you all not to fall victim to the rhetoric of school reform on either side. I frankly think the rhetoric of the school reform debates right now oversimplify in dramatic ways that are profoundly unhelpful and force and/or choices. Force either or choices as opposed to both and. In my experience, my sense, many of the answers to the core questions we face are both and. I think some of what Scott was presenting there at the end in terms of the ways in which some of the same standards relate to music and literacy is an example of both and. And I'll come back to that point. I also think we need to ask ourselves the question profound in education, is this an industrial endeavor or is this a professional endeavor? And I mean that not only for the educators, all of us who are educators, but I also mean that for how we think about the work with students. And I would posit, and I suspect at this level, most would agree, that our students are not widgets on a conveyor belt moving through getting times, interventions, a certain amount of time with given machines, our teachers. But I think that is the way most school systems are set up, that's the way most schools are set up, that's the way many classrooms are set up. And so part of what reform means to me is how we challenge that thinking, how we move from an industrial conception, how we educate to a professional sense of that, which I think is particularly important in urban contexts where our students come to us with fewer supports, fewer skills, fewer baseline ability, or baseline background knowledge. You shouldn't say that their potential is necessarily as large, but our school models aren't set up for them to succeed. So, to talk quickly about how I think the reform movement played with some of the challenges to it and what I would push you all. First of all, there's support at the school, and I'm going to pose a question in each of these. At the school level, do we believe that schools should be uniform or that schools should have variation in them? I think fundamentally there's been a lot of assessment of the sort of uniform models of school, the standards that are created around how time is allocated. If you look at the high school level back to the shopping mall high school, right, through all that read in graduate school. But what I would challenge you all is the push to think of content areas in isolation, the push to think of multiple and many electives at the high school level. Fundamentally, the push for electives is part of what drives the shopping mall high school conceits in large comprehensive high schools in particular. It's part of what creates large class sizes, entry-level courses. It's part of what creates scheduling that's geared around electives as opposed to core content areas. A huge part of my work in New York City at that point was, frankly, closing large comprehensive high schools and creating smaller schools. That one of the primary challenges to that work, I will tell you, there were two. There was one objection was that we were going to hurt the sports teams, and the second objection was that it was going to get harder to do electives of all different kinds. And fundamentally, I think the evidence out of the small school work in New York, and that's not true nationally, but we're careful about implementation and instructional design, is that even though it was harder to create distinct electives in a small high school schedule, the results for students were dramatically better given the personalization of the environments and the investment in the whole sense of what students' academic learning is. So I push you all to that idea. We can say we want a designated amount of time for music or other arts, but you be careful of the unintended consequences of that argument, where what it means is we want large comprehensive high schools where students slip between the cracks. Right? So as you think about this question, I would push you on that question at the school level. In terms of as teachers, as educators, I think the core question is, are we responsible for executing tasks? Are we responsible for doing things, or are we responsible for outcomes? New Haven has been at the leading edge of the teacher evaluation, what we like to call teacher evaluation and development reform nationally. Our emphasis, and the state has echoed this to some extent, is we need our evaluation development system to treat teachers as professionals. What does that mean? They need to be empowered, they need to be collaborative, and they need to be responsible for outcomes. Some of those things become uncomfortable. So our contract is one of the first to include student learning as a component of evaluation. We have, however, avoided the sort of raw percentages because we don't think that makes sense. I think that's an oversimplification. And we've also avoided the idea that student learning is defined outside of the classroom. We ask our teachers to define student learning objectives, so we've gone that approach. As we did that, I would say, right, there was pushback there were questions posed from music and art and other disciplines. They said, you can't do this. How do you measure learning? How are we going to measure learning in a music classroom? And my response to that is, if as educators we can't sit down at the start of the year and define what we want students to learn through the course of our 9 months with them, we have an entire other problem. So I would assure us that an embrace of professionalism means an embrace of responsibility for outcome. I think as policymakers, we need to be nuanced and subtle enough to allow room for definition of measures. I'd also say to the evaluation point that Scott raised, this is one I absolutely love, where it's a question of many folks, not just in music but science and many other disciplines, are raise concerns but are not evaluated by folks in the same subject area. One response to that is we can add more administrators who have licenses, who have the licenses. Right? A, politically, that's unlikely, and B, just because someone in Connecticut has the 092, which is our certification, I'd argue doesn't make them necessarily a good coach, a good evaluator, a good understander of content. So what's the next point? Well, then we need to get to teachers working with teachers, which in most jurisdictions, folks are fine with, as long as it's not consequential. Right? So they're fine with teachers coaching other teachers, but it can't be consequential. I would posit to you all that is an artifact of an industrial way of thinking, right? Where there are certain sets of folks who fit into different categories, and union members can't evaluate other union members. At the end of the day, it should be about development, but development includes components of evaluation, and in some small percentage of cases, there are hard conversations to have with music teachers as well as other teachers. And who's going to have those conversations? If not music educators. The last thing that I would push you, so if that's for schools and teachers, the last, I'm going to make 2 points here is about students. I do think one of the older simplifications that we sometimes find is around what are the impacts of No Child Left Behind. There's no question many of the ways that districts and policymakers and teachers and principals have reacted to No Child Left Behind has been to simplify and oversimplify the curriculum. I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I do think one of the things we need to, one core question that we need to challenge ourselves as educators is, do we believe students are passive or active learners? This to the idea of in urban education, certainly, and I would argue in all education, unless students see themselves or invested in the learning that they're doing, they were pushing a heavy ball of a very big hill. And for many students, that is music or arts or other things are an access point to that, and those students should have access to more. I will tell you, I was one musical person, so it would not have been music for me that got me engaged, but it was sports. And that's okay. And we need to allow that kind of flexibility in how we program schools. I also think, beneath that, students do need exposure to all content areas, all kinds of learning. And there I was essentially going to say much of what I think Scott said at the end is I think we do need to, it's easy to challenge the amount of time we spend on literacy. I think that's a very simple argument. I think the reality is literacy, when it's done right, is not about the language folks have spoken since they were born, but it is about critical thinking, it's about analysis, it's about it's about the creativity, it's about analysis, it's about performance. It can be about all those things. I think we need to understand literacy that way, but we also need to understand arts and music in terms of their ability to do those same things. So if the point is, and I would go back to, I think the thinking, engaging the argument in terms of how much time is spent on music, and I know that matters profoundly to many, I think is the wrong way to approach the argument, because instead of what learning are we trying to approach, and not ask the question, well, we as music teachers do these things, so give us the time. But instead, we as music teachers are trying to accomplish at a fundamental skill level the same kinds of things that are being accomplished in other parts of the curriculum. And so this discussion that happens here is most important to happen with other educators, so that folks, other educators in other disciplines, so that we escape the construct of the Carnegie Unit and how much time is spent in given disciplines, and instead focus on 21st century skills for students. So again, I think there's no question that the way No Child Left Behind and the reform movement that I've been involved with since 2003 has compromised student education in profound ways by oversimplifying curriculum and minimizing the amount of deep engaged learning they do in subjects like music. But I would push you all not to engage that debate on the same terms, because I think those terms are fundamentally flawed. And I think to the leaders in the discussion of reform, music teachers, art teachers, literacy teachers, policymakers, need to find the other constructs that are not about a given amount of time spent in a given discipline, but are about, and not about uniformity of schools, and are not about educators who do tasks as opposed to accomplish results. But instead to embrace those larger ideas and then have the difficult and non-rhetorical but practical conversations about how we accomplish those things for our kids. With that, we wanted to spend some time, but we wanted to mostly have a discussion with you all, so I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Great. Thank you both. A lot of information in a very fast time. Thank you both so much for that. And Scott has lots of slides, obviously, on store that he can bring in. We started a little late, and I really would. I'm fascinated by hearing this interchange in these conversations, and I'd love to get your comments and input. So we can spend a few minutes now engaging our two great colleagues, because we have an opportunity to have them here before we go to lunch and before we do the afternoon. So, what comments or questions? Yes.
I think it's an excellent point. I frankly think in other disciplines it has more to do with pedagogy than content. I do think where my head goes immediately in that is to shift to more student-centered lessons and students listening to each other in whatever the discipline is, and being able to respond appropriately to each other. It's something that we don't, again, in the conventional industrial mode of instruction, of teacher in front of the classroom, there isn't enough of students listening and repeating. I think that's a different, that's the first order of critical hearing. And obviously I think in music there's a whole other layer to it, which is and should be part of the discipline and the curriculum. I think the question, I think part of the point is explaining to colleagues, this is part of what we're doing in music class, so you can access those same skills when the students back in literacy, back in social studies, back in science.
In a way, this is a victim of our assessment technologies. We know, those of us who study language arts, have been an assistant superintendent of schools, the language arts dimensions are reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and enacting. Of those 6 dimensions, the only ones that are well represented on the test are reading and to some extent writing. We had, in the early generation state test in Connecticut, a listening section. And the problem with it was not that it wasn't a good idea, because it's something we spent a lot of time doing. The problem was that we didn't have good sound production equipment in classrooms around the state. So it died a technological death rather than a content death. And I think that's an object lesson as to what testing can sometimes do to curriculum. Is that the things that go away are the things that aren't easy to test, because tests have such high stakes associated with them that people go to what's on those limited tests. Hearing, listening with acuity are certainly profound skills. Here at Yale, in the medical school, all the students spend time in the museum because looking carefully is a problem. If you're a doctor, you need to observe with a very high level of meticulousness phenomena, and you need to describe them before you diagnose. So they go to the museum and look at artwork and then demand that the doctors, future doctors, describe in detail what they see before they come to any conclusions about the work that they're examining for similar reasons.
And I think I would build on Scott's point from the assessment. I think it's right. I mean, we are dramatically limited by what we're able to assess. And I think the reaction to that, at least my reaction to that is, okay, let's ask ourselves, how do we revisit some of these assessments or assessment methodologies? How do we think more deeply? Because I think to simply push back against standardized tests is an insufficient argument. I think, and so one of the things that we did at the outset of the forum here in New Haven was define that our board adopt 21st century standards as an explicit set of goals and build portfolio methods of assessment for that, so that we could have, and it's frankly not as developed as it should be, but Ellen Moss, our research supervisor, has been integral in it, that is a counterbalance to the tests, to the more basic tests. So again, you can't run from the challenge, you have to figure out how to embrace it and embrace it at a practical level.
And to the credit of the Obama administration, their education policy encourages multiple ways of measurement beyond those tests. It is true also that the smarter balance assessments, of which we're a partner, a number of your states are, or the PARC assessment that others of you are a part of, all are going to use an online delivery which enables you to expose the kids to media. That's in fact one of the challenges that are piloting.
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Yes.
I'm wondering, teaching in a school where over 90% of the kids are meeting and exceeding standards, but now we're a failing school. I'm trying to reconcile that with the remediation program that we're going to begin this year, which seems to me to be for a school that is irreparably broken. And I don't consider my school to be that way. Where are we losing the message here? Because when I'm looking at the things that we want to do with education, and for lack of a better word, the punishments that are coming down for not reaching the goals, where is the message getting lost here? What can we do to get that message back on track to the people that are actually in power of the legislation?
I resonated with Garth's comment about not liking this term school reform. I explained that it was a focus group kind of decision. But the rhetoric in education has changed. Dick Kesey did a nice history of this in his first session, to where Americans all felt their local schools, for the most part, they felt their local schools were pretty good, they were real concerned about education in a broader sense, to now you could say schools are broken in this country, and people will not be having an agreement with you, as though that's a universal truth. And that's not a universal truth. Your school probably had one subgroup that failed, and it was probably the special needs students. I guess that. Now, if you've been a smaller school that had, and your group size had fallen below the whatever the magic numbers in your state, that wouldn't have happened. That's one of the oddities of the current system, which is going away in this new waiver system. I guess that's part of the good news. But we need to, it's really hard because there are two forces at work, at least two forces at work that are pushing against reframing the conversation. One is the corporate force. I'm actually working on a policy article on this, the corporatization of American education right now. And the corporations looked around and found two areas in our society where there were tremendous profits to be made. One was in education and the other was in healthcare. And they're addressing both of those in a big way. And the way the savings in education are reducing because the big expense in education is teachers and buildings, reducing the number of teachers and buildings and drawing that out in profit figuring out other alternatives to teachers and delivery system. That unfortunately aligns with an agenda which tends to be a conservative agenda, which sees teachers as enemies because teachers don't tend to vote in a certain way. And therefore, weakening teachers and teachers' unions becomes part of that agenda. So, in order to counter that, we need to be advertising the good things that are going on in schools. As working in state agency, I see the problem because in order to get more money out of the state legislature, commissioners have to say, oh, we really need money because states are broken. If they emphasize what a good job they're doing, they don't get any more cash. So there's this sort of conspiracy that goes on in a broader sense to say schools are broken, we need Pearson, publisher, and break up those darn teachers' unions, which are the problem, all this to solve the problem. One of the great things about New Haven is that their reform agenda is negotiated with the professional association, and Garth's comments about recognizing that teaching is a profession, not just a labor for most people is an important one.
Right. And requires thinking differently on both sides, right? So, and frankly, the union contract is not a good vehicle to express professionalism. So much of what we've discussed with our unions is actually frankly not union issues. It's school management, school leadership, student learning issues. I do put too fine a point. I think the sort of the rhetoric about corporatization, I used the word, I think is damaging rhetoric in these discussions. I think that lots of money has been made in education for a long time. Textbooks publishers are one of the most profitable businesses that there are, and have a profound incentive to have the sort of the kind of Carnegie unit, different subject areas that are conventional methods of thinking about disciplines, which is, I think, part of what both Scott and I are pushing against. I think, the answer to your question, I do think, and this is part of the tragedy of reform, right? It's all well motivated. There's lots of good motivations on all sides. The recognition of a common motivation is part of what's enabled us to be collaborative here. But the things are not, policy isn't implemented well, right? And so oversimplified policy becomes something damaging as it's implemented in a school like yours. I wouldn't, however, walk away from the idea that subgroup performance matters, right? Because I suggest to you all that one of the most damning statistics is in those suburban communities how poorly performing African American, minority, low-income students are. Right? This is not just an urban problem. It's a national problem. And if we're not willing to acknowledge it as a problem, again, we have a whole other set of issues. So again, I think it's the oversimplification that is simple-minded policy on the one hand, and also simple-minded reaction to rhetoric on the other.
There's another comment over here.
As you're speaking about the pushing the ball up the hill and active students versus passive students in the setting, it struck me that I think a lot of people in this room feel that we have the same issue with administrators who we have to push the ball up the hill, the rock up the hill, because you're asking us to have the conversation, present the conversation about why it's important to you, as opposed to you coming to us like you would to your ELA or math school, where you would say, this is what we need from you. You're going to deliver these 21st century skills or these content things. And how do we have those conversations with administrators to say, we need you to look to us for these things rather than us coming to them?
Yeah. It's probably not a sauce. I think Ellen would probably tell you, I think in New Haven it happened a little differently than that. We did put music in our and others and say, 21st century, run with it, right? You guys need this because you can really help us push it. I guess I can say two things. One is that we're right now thinking hard about teacher learning, professional development. And one of my deep observations about that is everything that we talk about in student learning, right? We want engaged learning, we want open class. It's not what we do in adult learning, right? It's the opposite. And so we've tried to make a very positive and proactive statement that the same values of being purposeful, being supportive, being meaningful, which are the three attributes that are at the heart of our instructional practice framework, needs to be true for adult education as well. So some of that is, and I think a significant part of that is shifting the mode from this industrial to professional, right? And that's, unfortunately, we have many educators who were raised it came through at a point where it's in more of an industrial mindset, and the role of the administrator is to keep a lid on the school, particularly in urban environments, keep control, make sure it doesn't end in the paper, those kinds of things. Obviously, there's a lot of leadership to change there, but it's a collective responsibility, and I think some of that is sending the signals as teachers, educators of any kind, that yes, we're willing to be responsible. It's not that we're hiring for responsibility, it just needs to be the right kind of responsibility. And I think that's what our union has done here, and that's opened the space for our conversations and allowed us to meet each other halfway.
You'll find that the new reformulation of the standards will facilitate your work in this regard because it engages the students as independent thinkers. The whole goal of it is to get the students to be able to carry out these processes and to put the teacher in that facilitator, support, and coach role that you can do brilliantly when you have the opportunity to do so.
Right. The Common Core is an immense opportunity here. With the idea of fewer, clearer, and higher standards, right? The reduction of breadth and the focus on depth.
Oh, some of them are longer.
They did get long. This is true. But literacy or social studies or science curriculums that are, your colleagues who teach those, and it's I like to refer to the death march of content that doesn't allow for the opportunities for deeper engagement that has more of a natural connection with the work that all of you do. As educators, we have to, if we miss this opportunity, right, then we're going to be back where we started.
Scott, Garth, we are so appreciative of you for framing our afternoon. Your thoughts are so helpful, some provocative, all interesting. Scott, we so appreciate your being here. Garth, your New Haven teachers and colleagues here, it's a joy for us at the School of Music to have such a great relationship with the New Haven Public Schools. We're just so pleased that you were able to come today and do this. This does a great frame for the rest of our discussion. We greatly appreciate that.